but it's the last Sunday that I'm preaching of the month. And so we're covering another hymn this evening. And tonight, the hymn is "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus." And as we were singing the song, I didn't really recognize one of those four verses as one that was always in the songbook. And I thought, I need to say something to whoever it was that put that song on there. And then I thought for a second, wait, I think I'm the one that put it on there. So I'll have to fuss at myself about that. Tonight we're going to talk about trust. And there's two words here that we're going to look at. We're going to look at the word trust, and we're going to look at the word sweet. And so I want us to think tonight about how important trust is. This can be thought of as you trusting someone else, or you can think about it as someone having trust in you. There may be people that you trust, but you may not know this, but they may not trust you. But trust is an important aspect of our life, day-to-day life, but it's also an important aspect of our Christianity. And the trust that exists when it is there can be defined or be described as sweet, and the importance of something being quite sweet. And I think all of us can understand that as well. But to start with, because these are some conversations that we're having about hymns to begin with, this song, "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus," you can see it in your book if you were looking. But in 1880, the husband of the woman whose picture here is showing on the screen, her name is Louisa Stead. But in 1880, her husband drowned. Now, as I was thinking about this, I think the last sermon that I talked about a hymn dealt with drowning. So I hope they don't all end up that way, but this one did. But on this, in 1880, this lady's husband had drowned. 2 years later, the song was published. There was music that was put to words that appear to have already existed. But as you could imagine, losing your husband during this time period would have been certainly difficult. In fact, probably a almost potential disaster for a family had your husband in the early 1880s had died. It would have certainly put you in straits that maybe it's hard for us to recognize today when we have some safety nets built in. There's several different conflicting stories about the song as it was written, but one story goes that she wrote this song, or at least the poem part, and the music was added later, after someone had brought food to her family following the death of her husband. Now, as we can imagine, the family would have been certainly in some dire straits with the husband dying. And if someone brought food to the family, that would have been certainly quite helpful. And I thought about that. And again, there's some conflicting stories about this, but I think the basics of this are still important for us. How many of us have ever been in a trying or difficult situation and somebody has brought something to us? Perhaps it might have been, like in this case, food, but it might have been some other task or some other thing that maybe was done for or brought for. I would imagine that all of us in that situation would have described what was done for us as sweet. That was very sweet of you. That was very sweet that you did that. That's one thing that maybe I don't have to worry about in a litany of things that I do have to be concerned with. It's widely believed that she wrote this in response to the peace that she found in trusting Jesus. That she realized that the situation was bad, but hopefully there would be some type of help for her. What I found interesting is that in this situation, she ends up spending most of her later adult life as a missionary in Africa, doing religious work. And so that was something that I found kind of interesting about this as it went. But I want us to think tonight about, what does it mean to trust? Well, trust is an act of dependence, correct? You are depending upon someone else to do maybe what is needed. Now, how hard is it for us to trust people? I would imagine that for some of us, it might be very hard. For some of us, it may be a little bit easier. But part of the reason that we sometimes struggle with trust is because that trust has been broken. Think about people that you've known, that you've worked with, that you've dealt with, who have made promises. We talked about that last Sunday night, but that trust that you had in them was broken. Well, it's hard to sort of build that back up. It's hard to maintain trust. How many times does somebody have to break their promise to you before you stop believing them? For most of us, it's probably one time. He lied to me once. I'm never going to do it again. But that trust that gets broken down is hard to build up. But trust is depending upon someone else to do something. So, first of all, whether or not we are good at trusting, whether or not we like trusting, we have to have trust in our life. In Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, probably the most famous set of verses that include the word trust in them. We read there that trust in the Lord with all your heart. And the second part of that is to lean not on your own understanding, right? And then beyond that, in all your ways acknowledge him, and then he shall direct your paths. Well, if we are to trust in anyone, our trust needs to be in the Lord. Because as we talked about last week with promises, not getting, promises that were broken by other people, the Lord's promises are not going to be broken. So that's where the trust would come in there. But I would still argue that that's difficult. Because tonight, just a few moments ago, we prayed for Billy Hines. Because Billy's been going through a really difficult series of health issues. And we've prayed for other people over the years. And sometimes those prayers don't turn out the way that we want them to. And sometimes that trust that we maybe have that this is going to work out, it doesn't play out the way that we necessarily think it should. The problem with that line of thinking is that we're not the one that's in charge. We're putting our trust in whoever it is that is in charge. And also trusting, use the word again, that the person who is in charge or the entity, whatever you want to describe it, that it's done not for our will, but for the will of God. Because sometimes our will maybe doesn't necessarily jive with that of God. With Jesus, it is depending on him to do what is needed and what is right. Romans chapter 5 and verse 8 says that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus has done his part. He has done the part that he needed to do for our salvation. But here's the good thing. Jesus not only has done his part, but he'll also continue to do what's right as well. Matthew chapter 28 and verse 20, verses that I'm sure you all know right here. It says, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. I don't think that's a new verse for anybody here, but it's nice to hear that, right? That I am with you always. It's not somebody who we trusted and they did good. And then a second time we trusted and they did good. But then the third time we trusted them, it didn't really work out. Jesus said, lo, I am with you always, even unto the end. So I can maybe trust you a little. I can maybe trust my boss a little, but I'm also aware that you might break that trust or I might break it. But I know that I can trust Jesus throughout the whole thing. Now, trust means that we take someone, as the song said, at their word. Turn to Luke chapter 5. I want to think about an example of trust that is, to me, almost impossible to fathom. Luke chapter 5, we're going to read verses 1 through 11. And I want to say before we start this reading that I'm not totally sure I've ever had a level of trust that you're going to see in these handful of verses. Think about it for a second. Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. So it was, as the multitude pressed about him to hear the word of God, that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret and saw two boats standing by the lake. But the fishermen had gone from them and were washing their nets. Then he got into one of the boats, with Simon's, and asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the multitudes from the boat. And when he had stopped speaking, he said to Simon, launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. But Simon answered and said to him, Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net. And when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their net was breaking. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid, from now you will catch men." So when they had brought their boats to the land, they forsook all and followed him. So let's think about the different levels of trust that are here. First of all, they're hearing Jesus speak to them. And so they're listening to what he has to say. And anytime anybody's listening, there is a measure of, do I believe this or do I not? You may be enduring that right now. And I don't know if the enduring is the right word, but they had to listen to Jesus. And there were probably people over time that heard Jesus and said, I don't think this is not going to work for me. But he says, take the boat out here and cast down those nets. And Simon said, because this is, I said a minute ago, why I would have struggled with it. Simon said exactly what I think I would have said right there. Hadn't caught a thing all night. I can say that because I've never caught anything ever when it comes to fishing. And I'm still waiting for my first fish to jump in, and I've been several times. But the idea of saying, we've not caught anything, but yeah, let's go on out there one more time and just see what happens. So we can get pretty cynical about it pretty quick, right? No way this is going to work. But Simon said, what I said, I don't know, but we'll do it. And when they went out there, what happened? Caught too much, right? It was too much. They had to get people involved. The nets were full. The boat's about to sink. And it suddenly becomes pretty real to Simon. He said, I'm a sinful man. I've made a mistake. And Jesus could have said what? He could have said, absolutely, you should have listened to me the first time. You should have trusted me. That's not what he said. He said, from now on, you're going to catch men. You'll be fishers of men. He didn't fuss at him. He didn't say, why didn't you trust me? You'll be fishers of men. And when he says that, this is where I think the next level of trust comes in. In verse 11, so when they had brought their boats to land, they forsook all and followed him. From what I can gather, the job of a fisherman at this time would have been a very difficult job. But it was a job. It provided a livelihood. It provided a means for them and whoever they would have been supporting to be able to exist. We'll put it that way. But they left all of that to go follow Jesus. And at no point does Jesus say anything about, I'm going to pay you this much an hour. I'm going to give you this much in traveling money. No. It says they forsook everything and they went and followed him. That's a level of trust that I would have a really hard time doing. I know how much money I make at my job. If you came and offered me another job, I know all the things that I'm going to have to factor in before I make a decision to move to that different job. These people right here said, we'll go right now. That's a level of trust that's hard to fathom. Now, what's sweet about trust? All of us like things that are sweet, right? Something sweet. Some of us like sweet foods. Some of us maybe don't. But all of us like when someone is sweet because we associate sweetness and kindness and goodness, right? She's a really sweet person. She's a sweetheart, whatever term you want to use right there. Those are not negative terms that we would use about someone. But what's so sweet then about trust? Well, first, when we completely trust someone, we don't have anything to worry about regarding that. In Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6, a verse that you've heard before, we read, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. Now, first four words in that verse, be anxious for nothing. I don't know that any of us really follow along with that very good at all, do we? It would seem better if it said, be anxious for everything, right? I'm worried about everything. But if we worry constantly, then we're anxious for everything. If I'm worried constantly, where is my level of trust? Doesn't really exist, right? If you've ever been in a job where maybe the things weren't really great, if you're worried every time you see the boss, you're probably going to get fired or they're going to cut your position or whatever. It's probably not a whole lot of trust that exists within that spot, right? But in Philippians, we read, be anxious for nothing, and instead, with prayer and supplication, put our trust where? We read there, let our requests be known to God. Trust that God would take care of that. It's sweet to know that that is a level of trust that I can have. The problem is, I don't know where I have that anywhere else. But we get too worked up about that lack of trust in things that don't really matter. Think about how much time we spend fretting, worrying, being anxious about things that are going to happen whether or not we worry about it or not. We always joke at school, if you fell over dead in the classroom, they'd already have the job posted for the ambulance pulled out of the parking lot. And I've said that in here before as well. We worry and fret about those kind of things, but it's going to all go on. Our trust should be in who? Should be in Jesus. And there's a sweetness to that because the other things don't really matter that much. Be anxious for nothing. We don't have to do it by ourselves. This is part of the problem that people sometimes don't trust anybody. Have you ever known somebody who didn't trust people at all and they worked themselves to death because of it? They just kill themselves with work because they don't trust anybody else to hand it off to. Well, think about that for just a second. Have we ever doubted our own ability? Well, Philippians 4:13 says we can do all things through Christ, but I don't know that we always believe that, do we? I don't know that we always trust that we can do some things as well. I can trust, hopefully, myself. But I can trust that with Christ's help, I'm going to be able to do whatever it is I need to do. That's a sweet feeling to know as well. Now, are there things that we can't do by ourselves? Well, of course. Think about it for just a second. We can't control the world. How many of you wish you could? Here's the problem, though. If you could control the world, you'd do it in a way that I don't think would be very good. I don't mean to speak ill of you, but none of y'all are as smart about controlling the world as I am. I can do it all way better than you. So if you got to control the world, then I'd be upset with that because I would tell you all the things that you would do wrong. And I would almost guarantee that if I controlled the world, y'all'd fuss about the way that I did things as well. See, it'd be nice to control that, but if it's all right if we live in if we're the only person on earth, that's not the way it works. But we want to control all these, we want to trust in all these things, like we said a moment ago, that don't matter. The second one, we can't trust in our own righteousness to save us. I am a good person. I hope you can say that about yourself. I hope that I can say that about myself. But my goodness, my belief in my goodness also sort of puts a shadow on some things that I'm not as good at, right? You know, I'm thinking about all the things that I am good at and some of the things that I maybe struggle with, put them sort of over here. Remember, we got to weigh it. Think about all the good things right here. Well, if I'm trusting in my own righteousness to save me, it's not going to work. It doesn't work because there is none righteous. What's the Bible say? No, not one, right? None, right? So if I'm trusting in my own righteousness, I'm putting my trust in the wrong thing. Third thought. We can't get ourselves to heaven. I love to drive. Josh, you may not want to listen to this because you drive as a lifetime job. Josh drives to Michigan and says, well, we'll be back by lunchtime, or something like that. But I really enjoy driving because I like to drive and I like to see things that are out in the world. But I can almost guarantee you, deep in the psyche somewhere, the reason why I like to drive is I kind of like to have control. All right? Because I don't know that I trust you to drive me where I want to go. All right? Now, that may be bad. That may be tough for Mary to hear, but that's just how it is right here. I kind of like that control. If we're going down, I'm going to be the one that takes us there. That kind of thing right there. So when we think about driving, I trust that I can get from point A to wherever point B or C or X or wherever it might be along the way. I trust that I can get us there. And I think I can. I've driven in a lot of places. I've driven in cities and I've driven in rural areas. I've driven over mountains and I've driven on beaches. But I've never got to heaven by myself. See, I can't get there by myself. I trust that I could, But there's all sorts of things that are in the way. There are all there are all sorts of hurdles. There are all things of difficulties that would keep me from getting to where I wanted to go. But it's not just me. You can't say, well, move over, let somebody else do it. That's not the way it works either. None of us can get ourselves to heaven. How do we get there? Well, there's a map, but it ain't the map that you say, go up here and turn right. It's the map in the scriptures. It tells us how we are to live, what we are to do, that we're baptized, that we're saved, that we live a Christian life, that we continue. That's how we get there. Well, if I can't trust myself to get there, but I'm going to get there, I got to put that trust in somebody. And if I can't trust myself and you can't trust yourself, I don't need to trust you to get me there. Who's the only person that can get me to heaven? I think it's Jesus, right? That's all. That's my only option. That's the only option that I would have. In a world where we rarely have control, it's nice to have a little trust in somebody who does. So why do we trust Jesus? Well, 4 things, and we'll wrap up. 1, Jesus laid down his life for us. That's something that's worthy of trusting somebody. Because I think somebody might tell you, I would die for you, right? But you don't really know that until that actually happens. Jesus did. Jesus did for us. 2, because he has all authority. We talked last week about authority, but the word there, authority, has what in front of it? All authority. You know, we might have a little bit of authority here on earth. We might have a job or a position or a place in society that allows us to make a few decisions here or there, but that goes away. That authority, that we may lose that authority. That authority can be taken by somebody else. We get wrapped up in it, we may lose that in the process. But Jesus has all authority. Number 3, because without him, there's no hope. Why is hope so important? Well, is hope and trust the same thing? I don't know. Maybe. If you think about, though, without Jesus, there's no hope. If we don't have any hope, what's the reason of going on with anything? What's the reason of trusting anybody? One of the hardest things that I did when I was an assistant principal was have to deal with kids who in many cases didn't have any hope. But part of the reason they didn't have any hope is all the people they had ever trusted in their life had let them down. That kills their hope. Well, we're establishing here that yes, there are people in our lives that are going to let us down. There are people that are going to break those bonds of trust that we have. But hopefully what we've established tonight is that there is some trust in someone other than what's here on this earth. 4th one, why do we trust Jesus? Because Jesus kept his promises. All the promises that have been kept, all the promises that are still there. The song, "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus," is a pretty good little roadmap for us. If you look at all of the verses, almost everything that we've mentioned tonight comes from those types of verses. Trust is difficult. Trust is absolutely a difficult thing for us. It's easy to say, but it's hard to do. But I know that, as the song says there at the end, thou art with me till the end, right? And so this idea of trusting Jesus is because Jesus is the one that we can trust. 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9, I want to finish. The Lord is not slack concerning his promises, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. When does our trust in Jesus expire? I don't know. Never, but the difference is we don't know when we expire. And so we need to, the sooner we put our trust in Jesus, the better off everything will be. So I would encourage you this evening to put that trust, pull that trust away from things that are going to let you down and put the trust solely in Jesus. 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus. Would you stand as we say?